Today, we'll be taking a look at 4 different scenarios where cavers were trapped and crushed beyond hope in narrow, jagged tunnels. These are the stories of brave adventurers who, despite their experience and courage, found themselves caught in the unforgiving grip of the underground world. As always, viewer discretion is advised. It was supposed to be just another adventure. Brian MacArthur, an expert caver known for his calm composure and ability to navigate the tightest, most dangerous passages, was ready for something new. He had heard whispers of a system in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Tennessee, narrow, serpentine tunnels that few had explored. It was a challenge he couldn't resist. His excitement was palpable as he set off with his team, the thrill of discovery pushing him forward. The thrill of the unknown was what he craved most, but little did he know, that very unknown would soon become his worst nightmare. The air in the cave was thick with dampness, the faintest scent of earth and decay surrounding him. The tunnel before him twisted like a snake in the dark, a promising passage that beckoned him in. The walls were jagged and uneven, but Brian was used to such terrain. He'd squeezed through more tight squeezes than most could count, but this one felt different. This one had an unsettling silence to it. Still, his confidence pushed him forward. He had been in tighter spots before, deeper caves, more treacherous conditions. But what he didn't realize was that this tunnel wasn't just narrow. It wasn't just a challenge, it was a trap waiting to spring. As Brian crawled deeper into the passage, the walls began to press in on him, a subtle warning he ignored. He'd been in caves like this before, nothing to worry about. But with every movement, the tunnel seemed to grow smaller, the rocks pressing in on him like a vice. His body had to contort unnaturally to fit through the increasingly tight space. The stone scraped at his arms and legs as he pushed forward, trying to ignore the rising tension in his chest. It was a slow crawl, each movement more difficult than the last, the space around him narrowing and pinching his body in ways he had never experienced before. The rocks were jagged, and the air, what little there was, seemed to grow heavier with every passing moment. Then, suddenly, he felt it, a sharp pressure against his shoulder. His chest constricted and his legs felt the sting of something sharp digging into them. For a moment, Brian paused, breath shallow, his body wedged in the corner of the tunnel. He tried to move, but the jagged rocks refused to yield. Panic started to creep in, the realization that he was stuck slowly dawning on him. The passage, once inviting, had become his worst enemy. His breathing grew shallow, each breath harder to take than the last. The tightness was unbearable, and the more he struggled to move, the more the passage seemed to tighten around him. The rocks pressed against his ribs and shoulders, pinning him in place. His legs were numb now, his body uncomfortably twisted in a way that made every movement feel impossible. Panic surged through him, but his mind raced. He couldn't stay here. Not like this, not now. He had to get out. But no matter how hard he pushed, pulled, or twisted, the rocks wouldn't give way. They were unyielding, as though the cave itself had decided to claim him. His legs were stuck, his torso crushed between the unforgiving rock, and with each breath, the space seemed to shrink tighter, squeezing the air from his lungs. The panic that had been creeping inside him now exploded, coursing through his veins. His heart hammered in his chest and sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought to free himself. But the more he struggled, the worse it became. The jagged edges of the rocks were tearing at him, their sharpness digging deeper into his skin with every movement. He was trapped in a nightmare, one where every effort to escape only made things worse. Then suddenly, the rocks shifted, just slightly but enough. A jagged edge dug into his chest, and with a sickening crack, Brian felt the sharp rock crush his ribs. The air in his lungs was forced out, and his scream of agony was swallowed by the stone. His body twisted and his chest was pressed harder, impossibly harder, against the jagged rock. The pain was immediate, excruciating, but it was the suffocating pressure that soon became his greatest enemy. His breath came in desperate gasps, but the pressure on his chest made it impossible to take in enough air. His vision blurred, his body numb from the relentless crushing weight. There was no escape. Brian's team, still back near the entrance, heard his calls, heard his faint cries for help echoing through the narrow passages. But the more they tried to move toward him, the more disoriented they became. The cave, a labyrinth of twisting tunnels, was a maze. Every turn, every corner, led them further away from Brian. His cries grew quieter, more strained, and the team's panic mirrored his own. They were lost in the twisting maze of jagged rocks, no closer to him than they had been an hour ago. The rescue attempt was an agonizing struggle. Time was slipping away with every passing minute, and as the hours dragged on, the hope of getting Brian out alive began to fade. The team pushed harder, tried to think more clearly, but the cave seemed to mock them at every turn. Every step forward led to 2 steps back. The weight of the rocks pressing against Brian was unbearable, and his body, no longer able to withstand the crushing force, was slowly breaking. By the time they finally reached him, it was too late. Brian MacArthur, the experienced caver, the man who had explored countless caves, was gone. The rocks had taken him, and no amount of skill or willpower could have saved him. The team was left with only the cold, hard truth. Even the most experienced caver can be defeated by the very environment they love to explore. The cave had claimed him, and there was no escaping the reality of how quickly a simple adventure can turn into an irreversible tragedy. Up next, we'll be taking a look at the story of how the deadly crawl in Ellison's cave, located on Pigeon Mountain in Georgia, claimed Cindy Reed in 2005. Cindy Reed had always been an adventurer at heart. A mother of 2, she had found a unique way to bond with her teenage daughter, by exploring the world beneath their feet. For years, Cindy had wandered through caves, her passion for underground exploration as strong as ever. This time, however, was different. This time, she was bringing her daughter, Emma, along for her first real caving experience. It was supposed to be a moment of discovery, a memory they would cherish forever. They weren't alone. A small group of fellow cavers had joined them for the expedition into one of Utah's most remote cave systems. The excitement in Cindy's chest was palpable as she led Emma and the others toward the cave's entrance. She couldn't wait to show her daughter the wonders hidden beneath the Earth's surface, the beauty she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. At first, the cave was everything Cindy had promised, vast and open, a labyrinth of wide passages and towering rock formations. The light from their headlamps danced off the walls, casting eerie, beautiful shadows as they ventured deeper into the earth. Emma, wide-eyed and full of wonder, followed her mother through the majestic chambers, her excitement mirroring Cindy's own when she had first explored these tunnels. The air was thick with dampness, the coolness of the cave wrapping around them like a protective shroud. For a while, everything seemed perfect. The thrill of the cave, the excitement of the unknown. It was the perfect adventure. But as they moved further into the system, the cave began to change. The wide passages became narrower. The walls bent more, their sharp edges pressing in on them like the teeth of some great underground beast. The once spacious tunnels now twisted into an unforgiving maze. Cindy, ever the seasoned caver, didn't hesitate. She navigated the increasingly narrow passages with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime exploring caves like these. Emma stayed close behind, but Cindy could feel the tension building in her daughter. She knew this was the point where things could turn dangerous, but the cave had always been her second home. She had a confidence that came with years of experience. As they kept moving, she found a crawl space, smaller than the rest, a narrow passage that promised to lead to something more. It was just tight enough to spark Cindy's curiosity, just tight enough to make her want to see what lay beyond. It was supposed to be a simple crawl, something to show Emma the challenges of caving, but nothing could have prepared her for what would come next. Cindy squeezed into the tight space, eager to discover the chamber she hoped lay beyond. She could hear Emma's voice a safe distance from her, a soft murmur of excitement. But the moment she slid into the crawl space, everything changed. The rocks seemed to close in on her. At first, it was manageable. She crawled forward, pushing her body through the narrow gap, the rough stone scraping at her arms and legs. She could feel the pressure on her sides, but it wasn't unbearable. Not yet. She was determined to push forward, to show Emma just how amazing the world beneath their feet could be. But then the rocks began to shift, slowly, methodically, as if the cave itself was alive, constricting its hold on her. The walls pressed in tighter. Cindy's heart began to race. She tried to back out, but the passage was too narrow, too tight. Her legs were caught, wedged between 2 unforgiving slabs of stone. The more she twisted, the more the rocks pressed down, locking her body in place. Panic crept in, rising in her chest like a wave. She pushed against the walls, trying to find purchase, trying to pull herself free, but it was no use. The harder she struggled, the more the rocks seemed to pinch her body, pressing against her ribs, her legs, her back. The pain was immediate, a sharp, biting pressure that forced the air from her lungs. She felt her ribs begin to crack, the crushing weight making it impossible to breathe. The walls, once just a narrow obstacle, now seemed like an unrelenting trap, slowly squeezing the life out of her. In a panic, Cindy's mind raced. She had been in tight spots before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a crawl, this was a deadly vice. Her body was breaking, she could feel it. The weight of the rock was unbearable, pressing down on her chest, squeezing her ribcage, making every breath a battle. Her legs were numb, her arms trapped at her sides. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. All she could do was writhe in agony, every movement only making things worse. Emma quickly backed away and ran to get help. The rescue group tried to move quickly to reach her, but the narrow passages twisted and turned, confusing them, slowing their progress. It was a maze, and every minute that passed made Cindy's situation more critical. They were losing her. As they finally reached the crawl space where Cindy was trapped, it was already too late. The rocks had squeezed the life out of her. Her body, battered and broken, was crushed beyond hope. There was nothing they could do. The walls of the cave had taken her. There was no escaping the crushing reality of the unforgiving terrain. The group could only stand in stunned silence, the cold reality settling in. The cave, once a place of adventure and wonder, had become a tomb. The weight of their loss would haunt them forever, etched in their memories as a brutal reminder of the deadly power of nature. Cindy Reed, a woman who had spent her life exploring the unknown, had become just another casualty of the cave she loved so much. Her daughter Emma would never forget the promise of adventure her mother had made, nor the horrifying reality of that promise's end. The cave had taken Cindy, and in the end, there was nothing left but the silence of the rocks. Our next story features Steve Johnson, who had always prided himself on his experience in the extensive cave systems of Kentucky, particularly those winding beneath the hills of Mammoth Cave National Park. As a seasoned caver, he was no stranger to the treacherous and unpredictable underground world. He had spent countless hours exploring its dark and dangerous passages, confident in his ability to navigate even the most unstable and threatening environments. There was something deeply compelling about caves like these, raw, unforgiving, and full of mystery. This particular cave had earned a reputation for being unstable, with jagged tunnels prone to shifting and collapsing without warning. But that was exactly why Steve was drawn to it. He thrived on the challenge, the rawness of nature at its most dangerous. The risk didn't deter him, it excited him. It was a beautiful autumn day in 1998 when Steve and his team set out for the cave. They had gathered in a small group, ready to tackle the passage that had been on Steve's mind for weeks. The entrance was just a small opening in the hillside, barely noticeable to anyone unfamiliar with the area. But to Steve, it was an invitation to test himself, to face the raw power of the earth and see if he could outwit it. His team, though cautious, trusted in his leadership. They followed him through the darkened tunnels, the beams of their headlamps casting eerie shadows on the rough walls. The deeper they went, the more the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. The air grew thick and musty, the faint echo of water dripping from the rocks adding to the atmosphere of tension that hung in the air. For a while, everything went as planned. The narrow passages led them deeper into the cave, each turn taking them further from the light of day. But Steve's mind, sharp and alert, could sense the subtle changes. The rocks felt less stable, the air a little thicker. He was no stranger to these signs. The cave was restless, and it had made its presence known. But Steve was undeterred. He had explored more dangerous caves before, caves that had swallowed entire teams whole, and yet he had always emerged unscathed. This cave would be no different. They approached a passage that seemed to be relatively stable at first, a jagged corridor that slithered like a serpent through the rock. Steve was intrigued by it, sensing that there was something more beyond it. It was narrow, yes, but nothing that a caver of his experience couldn't handle. He pushed ahead, leading his team through the constricting gap. It was tight, the rocks pressing in on all sides, but Steve moved with a practiced ease. The passage, though unstable, was passable. At least it seemed so at first. Then came the crack. It was sudden, loud, and deafening. The very air around them seemed to vibrate as a massive section of the ceiling above Steve gave way. A rumble echoed through the cave as rocks and debris began to tumble from above, showering down with violent force. Steve barely had time to react. His instincts kicked in as the rocks began to fall. He darted to the side, squeezing his body through a narrow gap in the rock wall, hoping to escape the coming onslaught. But fate was not on his side. What should have been an escape route turned into a trap. The gap, which at first seemed like a lifeline, was now a cage. As Steve wriggled through the narrow space, he felt his body become wedged between the rocks. The more he tried to push forward, the tighter the space seemed to become. The rocks, once his saviors, were now his prison. His legs were trapped, pinned against the sharp edges of the stone. His chest, too, was pressed against the rough surface, causing excruciating pain with every shallow breath. The chaos of the collapse continued above him, but now Steve was paralyzed, stuck in a crevice with no way forward and no way back. He tried to wriggle free, but the rocks tightened their grip with every movement. The more he struggled, the more the rocks seemed to shift and press down on his body. He could feel his ribs beginning to crack, the crushing pressure of the stone threatening to break him apart. Panic gripped him. His heart raced and every breath felt like a victory over the suffocating weight of the rocks. But the air was growing thin, and Steve could feel the sharp edges of the rock cutting into his skin, blood dripping down his legs and arms. His body was slowly being crushed under the pressure, and the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. There was no way out. The rocks had won. He was trapped, alone, with no one to help him. The rest of his team was still trying to escape the falling debris and make their way back to safety. They had heard the collapse, but they had no idea where Steve was. No idea that he was trapped just inches away from freedom. Every time they tried to call out, Steve couldn't answer. The weight of the rocks made it impossible for him to breathe, let alone scream. His body was growing weaker, each breath a laborious struggle. The pressure on his legs and ribs was relentless, and the pain was unbearable. Hours passed. Steve's body began to betray him. His limbs grew numb from the lack of circulation, his chest constricting with every shallow breath. He thought of his team, of his family, of the people he had left behind. He wondered if they would ever find him, if they would even know where to look. The crushing weight of the rocks continued to suffocate him, the cold stone pressing against his bones as time seemed to stretch on indefinitely. It wasn't until several hours later that the team managed to find their way back to the spot where Steve had been trapped. But by then, it was too late. Steve's body had succumbed to the immense pressure. When they finally reached him, his position was horrifying. His body twisted at an unnatural angle, his limbs crushed beneath the weight of the rocks. The cave, which had once been a place of mystery and challenge, had turned into a deadly tomb. Steve Johnson's body was recovered in the same position he had been trapped in, and the chilling angle at which he had been crushed left a permanent mark on his team. They had all known the risks, had all accepted the dangers of caving, but nothing had prepared them for the brutal reality of what had happened. Steve's death was a reminder of the raw, unpredictable nature of the earth, a reminder that even the most experienced cavers could fall victim to the crushing power of the tunnels they loved so much. The passage that had once seemed like an exciting challenge was now a symbol of the cave's indomitable power. For Steve, it had been just another adventure. For his team, it was a lesson in the unforgiving nature of the caves, and a haunting memory that would stay with them forever. In January 2012, Tony Fisher, a rookie caver with little experience in the claustrophobic and treacherous world of narrow caves, set out on an expedition to the infamous Bluff Dweller Cave in the Ozarks. The labyrinthine system was known for its tight, winding passages and unpredictable hazards, but little did he know that this would be his last adventure. It was Tony's first time to the Bluff Dweller Cave in the Ozarks, an area known for its twisting, jagged passages that seemed to close in on anyone brave or foolish enough to venture into them. Tony was eager to impress his more seasoned caving companions, who had been exploring the underground world for years. The thrill of exploration had consumed him, and he was eager to prove that he could handle the dangers that came with the territory. But what Tony didn't know was that the cave in front of him was unlike any he had ever seen. It wasn't just a cave, it was a hungry, unyielding force waiting to consume him whole. The entrance was narrow but not overly threatening. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be just another passage, a door into the dark underground world. Tony's friends, more cautious but still confident, warned him to be careful, but Tony, eager to make a name for himself, brushed off their concerns. He was determined to venture deeper than they ever had. The narrowness of the passage didn't intimidate him. In fact, it excited him. It was exactly the kind of challenge he had been hoping for. As he crawled deeper into the cave, the tunnel began to tighten. At first, the constriction seemed manageable, even exhilarating. The passage, though narrow, was navigable, and Tony felt a sense of triumph with every inch he moved forward. But the further he crawled, the more the rocks seemed to shift and press against him. The walls were jagged, the rock formations sharp, like the teeth of some great underground beast, eager to tear into him. His skin scraped against the rough stone, but Tony pressed on, determined to conquer the cave and impress his friends. Then, without warning, the passage narrowed to a point that Tony hadn't anticipated. The rocks on either side began to press against his chest, shoulders, and legs, forcing him into an unnatural position. The air grew thick and suffocating, each breath feeling more labored than the last. Tony tried to backtrack, but the passage was too narrow. The rocks had already locked him in, and no amount of squirming could free him from the grip of the cave. The panic began to set in. Tony realized too late that he had made a grave mistake. The cave wasn't just a passageway, it was a trap. The walls were closing in on him, and the jagged rocks seemed to press harder against his body with every passing second. The tightness of the tunnel made it impossible for him to turn back or move forward. Every inch of his body was trapped, pinned between the unrelenting stone. The weight of the rocks above him seemed to grow heavier by the second, adding to the suffocating pressure that made every breath a struggle. Tony's heart raced, but the panic only made things worse. He could feel his chest being crushed, his ribs straining under the intense pressure. His legs were wedged in such a way that he couldn't move them, couldn't even wiggle free. The pain was immediate and excruciating, the jagged rocks digging deeper into his skin, leaving cuts and bruises in their wake. But the worst part was the suffocating weight of the earth itself, pressing down on him, slowly squeezing the life out of him. His calls for help were muffled by the thick stone surrounding him. His voice barely carried through the suffocating darkness, swallowed whole by the cave that seemed to devour him. Every time he tried to shout, the pressure increased, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. He tried to force his way out, but the rocks wouldn't budge. No matter how hard he fought, no matter how desperately he tried to escape, the cave was always one step ahead, closing in tighter, ensuring that he couldn't move. Back outside the cave, his friends were growing concerned. They had heard his initial shout, but they had no idea just how deep into the passage Tony had gone. They called out for him, but there was no response. Panic began to spread among them as they tried to retrace their steps, calling his name and searching the narrow tunnel for any sign of him. But as they moved deeper into the cave, the truth became chillingly clear. They found him wedged in the passage, his body trapped in such a way that no amount of pulling, no amount of force, could free him without causing more damage. The more they tugged and tried to maneuver him out, the more the rocks seemed to constrict around him. Every attempt to move him only made the pressure worse. It was as if the cave itself was holding him in its jaws, unwilling to release its prey. Tony's body was trapped in an unnatural position, and his friends could see that it was only a matter of time before the crushing weight of the rocks would take its toll. The air around them seemed to thicken with the heaviness of the situation, the panic and helplessness settling in like a cold fog. Every attempt to pull him free only seemed to tighten the grip of the cave. Time was running out, and with each passing minute, Tony's chances of survival grew slimmer. Finally, after hours of painstaking attempts, Tony's friends managed to free his body from the cave's grasp. But it was too late. The damage was irreversible. His body had been crushed beyond recognition. His chest caved in under the suffocating weight of the rocks. The pressure had punctured his lungs, and his ribs had shattered, the jagged bones now a grim reminder of how merciless the cave had been. Tony Fisher, the young rookie eager to prove himself, had become just another tragic tale of the unforgiving nature of underground exploration. The cave, once a place of excitement and adventure, had taken him in, swallowed him whole, and left behind nothing but a haunting reminder of its power. His friends, forever scarred by the experience, would never forget the night the cave had eaten one of their own, a brutal, inescapable reminder of the dangers lurking in the depths of the earth. If you found these stories as chilling and haunting as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more terrifying caving disasters. Share this video with anyone you know who thinks they can handle the underground, and let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Have you ever had a close call in a cave, or do you know someone who has? We'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, stay safe.